And we are live. Great, welcome everybody. I assume that means I'm allowed to start speaking, so I'm just going to start speaking. Welcome everybody to this, thanks Christian, to this talk hosted by the Citizen Assembly Working Group of the UK Extinction Rebellion. We are going to be talking about digital tools for deliberative democracy. So that is very exciting. Welcome everybody on Zoom and welcome everybody on our various social media platforms. We are live streaming this today, so that's very exciting. And this is part of the April Rebellion anniversary. We've been given a whole day today, which is themed Beyond Politics, which was one of the sites last year in central London at Parliament Square, where we had loads of people's assemblies and lots of talks and various other sort of political things happening. And we've been curating a day today with lots of events and podcasts and videos. So this is the last event of the day, and we are so thrilled to have Adam Nosal here today, who will be talking us through these digital platforms. I need to say a few housekeeping things, so I'm just going to get my notes. Please could everybody on Zoom make sure to have switched off their microphones while the presentations are going on. And if you have questions on Zoom or on social media, then please put them in the chat and we will be collating them on a cool little spreadsheet and we'll make sure that we get to all your questions. And just to say, on Monday, we had loads of questions and we didn't get round to all of them. So if we don't manage to answer your questions, please make sure that you either tweet them at us or email them at us and we will get back to you. So to speak to us or communicate with us, you can tweet us at citizensxr or email us at xr-citizensassembly@protonmail.com. So why are we talking about digital tools for deliberative democracy? So just to really quickly clarify, deliberative democracy is what citizens' assemblies are. So citizens' assemblies are just one of the kinds of processes that you can have in deliberative democracy. You've got people's assemblies, which some of you may be familiar with because Extinction Rebellion does a lot of people's assembly stuff. There's also citizens' juries. They're all a little bit different, but what they have in common is the deliberative aspect. So it's where people talk and learn from each other, from experts. They then share their thoughts, their concerns, their questions, and through deliberating, literally deliberating with each other, they either change their minds or they share their point of view, and that's how they come to decisions on particular issues. So just to make sure that we're on the same page there. So at a time when we can't all physically be together, obviously coming together to deliberate is a little bit of an issue now because we are literally not allowed to meet face to face. So we thought that we would ask Adam how that kind of thing works. You know, can we actually have a citizens' assembly online, or is that just impossible? Or what do we do with that? So I think I'll hand over to Adam now and he will start explaining this for us. I don't know, do I need to? No, there you are, great.
Thank you very much. Yes, and thank you for giving me this platform, everyone. It feels a very special place to be, particularly now in regards to the position that our global family is in. It's really a time for trying to figure out and explore new ways of living together or speaking together or connecting together. So yeah, thank you very much for that. I've got some slides that I'll run through and we'll chat about, and but we'll settle into a period where I'll share my experience of and also explain why it's me that's speaking here tonight and not anyone else. And I'll touch upon digital democracy is quite a general approach, and then we'll move into the more citizen assembly type form of convening as well, because I've got experience and stories to share from both parts. And yeah, that's where we'll end up tonight. And then, yeah, I look forward to sort of fielding some questions. What I will mention at this point, and I think it's special to do so, is that my value of this form of convening, or the opportunity that's present within our sort of agency as citizens, that's available within digital forms of governance or digital forms of engagement or gathering. My views on that have transcended this event that we're in just now. And I feel it's always quite important just to capture that and mention that. And so when I'm speaking just now, I might not be referencing too much of the events that are going on just now, because this has been something I've been speaking about and exploring and testing and getting things not always right in this space for a number of years. Yeah, that's the position that these words will find you from this evening. So I'll jump into the slides that I've got to share with you tonight, and we'll take this together. So Tula is the organization where that I've come from, and we'll speak about that a little bit later on. And wait, bear with me, ladies and gentlemen. There we go. So this was one of the best things we did even dress rehearsal for this, didn't we, ladies and gentlemen? It's wonderful that it's decided not to work for us now. But let me just get this screen sharing sorted. There we go. So yes, about me. So Adam Nosal, I am described as many different things, some that I enjoy, and many that sometimes I'll move around. But finding out or describing what it is I do has been quite a challenge for me and my family for a number of years. I'll go into that at the end of the presentation. But one thing that I tend to sort of focus on is sort of UX designer. So that is user experience design. I have a deep passion and love for this space that is the internet. And I get quite precious over a lot of the choices that we've made in this space. And I ask a lot of questions of it. But that's not always been the case. And for example, questions such as this here, you'll see two things that look very similar, but I'll ask questions such as, why are there bars on this side and why is there a wheel on that side? So little things like that you would just sort of gloss over. I spend a lot of time thinking and asking questions about. And the reason for that is because I know about the processes that go on behind making these choices. And for example, on this one here, the reason that the bars are on one side was that Facebook wanted to see the psychology of waiting. So this is in the realms of our digital spaces and the impact that they have on us. And they did a thing called A/B testing. So they sent X amount of people in one direction, so they experienced one thing, and X amount of people in another direction to experience another. And what they found was, because we're obviously very open with our opinions in this space, which is, might I add, quite a center of our discussion just now. And these are where many of our political debates and discourse happen. whether or not we like it or not. But the reason why Facebook has opted for the wheel and not the bars on this occasion is because when people saw the bars, they blamed Facebook for being slow when it was loading up. But when people saw the wheel, they blamed their device. So as individuals that make the choices in Facebook, they obviously wanted a negative experience to be associated with something that wasn't them. But the reason I mention this is because, well, one, now you'll probably never be able to go around the internet the same now. You'll be looking at every little thing like this and wondering why it is. And that's one of the curse of having these. But there's ethical reasons around these choices as well. And so when I talk about UX design in that space, that's what I kind of talk about. And I'm very interested about the ethics of this space because I've got quite a deep passion about it. Also things like of this slide here. So you'll see things like 552 people viewed this product in the last 24 hours. So I'll ask questions. Why are we encouraging that? Why, out of all the choices we could make in that space, have we put things up like that? And there's different behaviors why we put them in. Obviously, here we'll be wanting to give people the feeling that they have to buy this product and fear them into doing so. But the other thing I try and do when I'm talking about digital spaces is I try and incorporate physical values into them. So I think of this experience, does this happen in a shop? For example, does a shopkeeper come round when you walk into to buy an item and tap you on your shoulder and remind you that X amount of people have seen this? So just like an organization such as Civic Signals, for example, who are doing incredible work in the space of trying to increase the wisdom of our digital spaces, they take a lot of their values from physical environments and try and place them into our digital engagements to make it a better place for all. And the other thing that I'm very passionate about as well is how young people and our human beings that are new to this world experience our digital interactions and spaces. So I'll talk a lot about spaces. So for me, Snapchat is a space that there's hosts of, and they invite people into that space. Facebook is a space that people host it and invite people in. But for example, Snapchat, they have done things such as streaks, for example, which encourage people to stay in that space probably longer than they should. And it's all about what they call social proof, making people feel like they should be there. And it's all part of quite a morally thin pursuit, which is known as the attention economy. So when I'm talking about digital spaces and digital democracy, I look at all the spaces in which that we show up in and how they're acting. And although I've not had any involvement with all these examples that I've shown you just now, apart from me sending letters and emails to them saying, can you explain to me why this is, and often not getting a reply, I still feel very connected to it and almost like I'm a steward of this space, even though that people don't often listen to what I have to say. But I feel we've got a sense of responsibility for this wonderful event that is the internet. So this has not always been the case, and it's not always been my full focus. Just now, most of my attention goes in the space of what's called Tula. Tula.town is the organization and the platform that I've created and founded, and the organization that I'm a part of. And that's what brings me together with Extinction Rebellion, is because we've been trying, as the slide suggests, to increase the agility of video gatherings so that we can co-create within virtual space. And this is very much the space that we've been trying to make better for this type of convening, which we've been speaking about tonight, and we're going to talk a little bit more about. However, this has not always been the case for me. My life is almost been split in half with my professional or curiosity, shall we say. And I used to have what I call proper jobs a while back, and that was, my roots are in outdoor education, community development, cycle development, sport, in there. And it was around 2012, I started getting really engaged and teach myself a lot in the online space. And many of you may have come across a TED talk by Sir Ken Robinson that sort of triggered me. Do schools kill creativity? And I was really interested in how we can use technology to create better forms of learning and environment that move away from our age segregated sort of systems that we have just now. And yeah, I set up my first sort of technology company called Hive Education, which was trying to we were trying to crowdsource careers advice is what we were working on. We did that for a number of years, and that really very quickly moved me into increase my digital understanding of this space, what it takes to build in this space, what it takes to design in this space, and all the hundreds of choices that you've got to make in this space to make sure you're a good host of someone else's time. The other thing that happened around this period of time, which had a huge change in me, was becoming a father. That very abruptly changed my understanding of how the size of now is. And I started really focusing my attention on things that were more prominent in our world, particularly around the health of our democracy, the health of our planet, and stuff like that. And the Scottish independence referendum in 2014 was the sort of landmark event which changed my focus in democracy. I was looking around and wondering, how have we ended up in a position like this? It was really, really polarized. The discussion was really toxic. And I left that feeling quite undernourished in somewhat in regards to how we were doing it. So I started looking about to see someone else must be working on this. And I got to meet this wonderful lady, Pia Mancini. So it was her TED Talk in 2004 that really spoke to me. So what is democracy for the internet era? If you haven't seen it, I would really recommend checking it out. But she asks this question, or has this statement, that she has a deep belief that we are 21st century citizens doing our very best to interact with 19th century designed institutions built with an information technology of the 15th century. And because the internet is such a way, I reached out and said, I want to work with this. I want to help what you're doing. And that led me to collaborating from afar with an organization called Democracy Earth Foundation. So if you're new to them, essentially they are using a technology which is known as blockchain, which is a form of technology which makes it very challenging to replicate something within digital space. So it lends itself to hosting voting processes, for example. But they were looking at trying to redesign the form of the engagement of voting and based around principles of liquid democracy. And my first sort of encounter with them was they did a pilot in Colombia. So it was during the 2016 referendum in Colombia. So they had a peace referendum. And what Democracy Earth were involved in doing was they offered their platform as a way to for citizens to engage. It wasn't upheld whatever was voted on or discussed on their platform, but they run it side by side with what was happening under the traditional form of ballot voting. And there were some really interesting things that came out of that space. And for example, this here is an example of what the difference between direct democracy, so single choice, which we're quite familiar with, yes or no, in or out, support or reject. But then what the difference with the principles on here and with Democracy Earth Foundation is that they allocated individuals tokens. So rather than just getting one vote, you would get 100 tokens that you can place over certain parts of the vote. The other thing that's quite interesting about it is that it makes it possible for citizens to vote things, take allocations of their tokens and give them to someone else that they might think is more informed to make that decision. But that always remains within their control. At any point, they can move them back. And what's really interesting about this is what we have to remember is much of our voting institutions or practices that we have are built around what we think was possible to administer, and also what was possible to be achieved within the global or the consensus of trust that was available at that time. And it's done really well in that space. But what you can do with this form of engagement is so much more. It opens up a huge realm of possibility of voting, that you can gain a deeper insight pre-vote and post-vote, which generally will increase the health of the conversation in that space. However, it's not without its challenges, which I'll speak about soon. But for example, in the referendum, in the yellow bit here, do you agree with the agreement to end the conflict and build lasting peace? So that was the official referendum question that citizens got to ask in the referendum in Colombia. And this Democracy Earth ran this process alongside. But what they were able to do is, because they had different tokens, is they split the referendum question into its component parts. So there were all seven component parts in total. And individuals could allocate part of their tokens across this, and they could do it over a fluid period. So they could move it forward and back over the time and stuff in that space. And what was interesting was the vote mirrored that of that which happened in the area, but with a difference being that there were certain areas that came up which you could see why individuals voted no. Then some of the challenges with the traditional form of do you accept this or reject it, yes or no, is that you don't actually know. You're not in a better place once any decision's been made after that. And where here, at least you have got a better understanding of what's possible there. But it doesn't come without its challenges, like I said. This was just one example. Democracy Earth just now are doing some incredible work still in that space. And this really gave me an insight to a number of the challenges. One is the challenges of building on this technology and designing in this technology is really hard. And it sort of highlighted the challenge with blockchain and digital democracy in general, is that we're traveling across ground without words to articulate it. So you'll often find this if you involved with blockchain form of digital democracy, is there's a whole new realm of language has appeared in that space to try and articulate what it is, what things meaning. So, you know, a smart social contract, for example, tokens, and trying to get to understand that was what I spent a lot of my time doing, with trying to help bring it into this world in that space, but also with an understanding that despite the flaws of the ballot box and the democracies that we've got here just now, is that is still quite accessible for most people most of the time. And some of the challenges that are presented when you start moving into digital democracy is you start expanding that in regards to people's knowledge and trust around that. And some of the questions I would be asking a lot in this space is, are we trying to solve a spiritual problem with a technical solution? Is some of the questions I would be asking in there. And still a question that I spend a lot of time asking, and also the various different answers that I've landed upon with this have guided why I'm working in the space that I'm working in just now. And I mentioned a bit about the ballot box there. One of the challenges to blockchain form of engagement or voting or digital democracy platforms is few people in the world know how they work, or fewer people in the world understand how they work. With a ballot box, for example, even if you haven't ever been involved in the process of collating votes, making sure that the ballot box goes to the right place and that the votes are counted, most people could explain what the little yellow tabs are there for example. And they're there to provide security. And we've distilled a level of our trust on this system that meets most of our sort of trust insecurities most of the time. But when you move into sort of blockchain based stuff, a lot of the challenges we had in that space was the adoption of it. And what I've found over the years in this space, and when we're talking about digital forms of democracy or digital forms of engagement, is that there is an expectation discrepancy that we often have. And you'll come across this within yourself, within your own thinking, but also within, you'll find it if you're trying to implement these things as well, is that we often hold up far too much higher expectations of these things. So we'll say things, for example, when it comes to gathering people, like we've been doing to have discussions around things in virtual spaces, you'll get asked questions such as, what happens if people don't know how to get there, or they don't know how to link, or if there's a power cut or things like this. And these things all affect our physical forms of gathering, but yet for some reason we heighten this in our digital worlds because it's new. And you'll also see this in regards to, and these are legitimate claims as well, if to tamper with a ballot box, for example, you could get, and there are instances and experiences of this where that has been manipulated, but it doesn't really go that far. Some of the challenges in the digital side of things is if that was to be manipulated, it could go very far without people knowing. So there's pros and cons in this space. And the work that we've been doing, or the space that I'm sitting in with it, I feel tries to transcend those type of challenges that we have. So this leads me now into 2018. So what I haven't also mentioned is I'm a facilitator at heart. I'm a peace educator. I'm used to gathering people in physical spaces for different processes. I've been involved in various different gatherings similar to like a citizen assembly or climate cafes, or different transformative processes where humans gather to find clarity over a situation. And I've had the honor of hosting those and being hosted in those processes. And in 2018, we created a pop-up university to find solutions to reduce plastic waste. And what we did was we invited people together, and we really wanted to see if we could do this process differently and convene these people and still get the experience of these gatherings around citizens gathering around an issue, bringing in different informed opinions and then making choices out of that. If we could do the same type of experience in a virtual space. And what we did, and this is a very common image just now, you'll be seeing it everywhere in people's posts. But yeah, we gathered people virtually, but we also did a hybrid type style delivery and a blended style delivery. So our virtual gathering, we brought people together for, I think we were 5 weekends we were together. Sometimes we met virtually, so we used platforms that exist back then. So Zoom was one of the spaces that we used, among many others. Jitsi as well was another space we showed up in, which is an open source form of video conferencing platform, which is free to use. And we also did hybrid style delivery. So we brought people together. We were in a room, but we also virtually brought people in to break out in that room. And what was really interesting about this process was, although originally we only intended to invite people from Scotland, because as the nature of these things are, that's how the funding went, and they required it to be geographically bound in that way. Because we were doing it on the internet, we started getting requests from all over. And this is when we started playing around in that space a lot. And we brought stuff in from Democracy Earth platform as well. So we had different voting platforms that were running side by side on there. And we also did stuff around blended delivery. So blended being that you would have asynchronous forms of engagement, meaning we would pose questions in a digital space. People would then go off and come back in that form of engagement. And this is where where a lot of the foundations of the work that we're doing came from in here. So we gathered around 50 individuals. We integrated different form of coaching in that process as well, to take care of the sort of personal side of going through these processes, because the processes that are part of citizen assemblies and gatherings and methodologies like that are really intensive. People have to let go of different assumptions they've got. They have to challenge their own assumptions they've got, and they really go in a process as a group. So we were trying to create a methodology or of a way to do that. And here are just some different platforms that we used as a way for to host different forms of engagement, where we asked individuals if ... our world would be a better place. And what was really interesting thing that we learned out of this process of convening this in this way was how limited our virtual spaces are. So our virtual spaces have really been optimized for a boardroom style setting. They have been designed that way because that's where most people have been using them, and that's where the economy or the business model for them lies. So they tend not to deal too well with forms of group dialogue, group co-creation or contribution. And that's when we realized that we needed a different space in there. And this is where the platform that we've been building sort of was born out from. So how might we improve the health of our civic conversations, for example? And how might we enable digital facilitators to easily deliver their learning all over the world? And that's where Tula was born out of. And what we've been trying to do with this, in this learning that we've been spent, of convening individuals, but also digital democracies, to create a place where citizens can gather, and the hosts of that gathering have the agility to hold various different types of discussions in that space, but also to work on various different things. Because when you're a part of a citizen assembly, it's not like the experience that we're in today, where there is an individual talking and broadcasting to a group. There is a hive of activity and discussion and crossover that goes in that space. And what we've been working on, Tula, is trying to create that digital agility for that to happen. And how we do that is through things like the session builder, for example, where the hosts can program their delivery. So they can say, right, for 10 minutes, we're going to talk about this topic. We're going to put you 10 people in this group, and they click publish, and off it goes. And the other group could be set and do the same thing. And these tasks can be dragged and dropped into those. And you can easily integrate different voting and different questions and visualization techniques as well. A bit like this, so you can build boards. What's wonderful about citizen assemblies and these is there's a whole host of methodologies, almost meeting technologies that we've created around the ways to convene and ways to guide citizens to a place of clarity. And for example, in Tula, you can design boards, for example, or visual places that you can harvest things for. And, you know, many people know about the impact versus effort chart, but we use this in our platform as a way to measure desire of someone willing to change and power of someone willing to change. So as citizens, you can start placing down a map, say, for example, in our case, it was around how do we reduce plastic waste? So we were saying, well, who has the desire to change? And we would place them on the different chart. And then who has the power to make the change? And what's really incredible about a process like this is you start to then name things on this, and it suddenly becomes real and very empowering. Like if normally you say, oh, the council won't change anything. Well, who's in the council? Who is the person? Do you know the person? Can we meet the person? And suddenly action starts to happen around that. And that's just one example of the boards that can be made in our space to help harvest those conversations. And with Tula, what we're trying to build is a marketplace of meeting methodologies. So there's all different forms of engagement, whether it's different boards, whether it's things like the work that reconnect methodologies, that individuals can then incorporate them into their gatherings, and citizens can then really lift their level of convening. And I know some people are doing incredible work just now at trying to hold and shape the process of what a citizen assembly might look like. And we hope that Tula could be a place to help share that around the world. So yeah, that's been a whistle-stop tour of me, of my engagement with digital democracy and some of the things that we've used in the past. This slide here shows a picture of my marriage certificate. And there's a very good reason for saying this is for a very long time, I mentioned at the start of the show that no one really knows what it is that I've done. And in this case here, the lovely lady who was on the phone at the other end of the office when we had to register the marriage, my wife was clearly quite upset because she had been speaking to this person trying to convey to her what it is that I do. And she got on the phone to me, and I was speaking to her again and again and saying, well, is it this? Is it this? And she just kept replying to me saying, that's not in the box. That's not in my box, is what she said. And then she hung up the phone and got annoyed. And then I never thought anything of it. And then when it came back to me, it said public speaker on education, which I thought, well, out of everything that I could have been, it wasn't too bad. I think I've come out trumps there. But the reason I'm sharing this with you just now is because much of how we've formed our form of governance and our ways to engage as citizens have been kept in boxes so far, and they're exclusive to a certain amount of people most of the time to do it. And what really excites me with the combination between citizen assemblies and digital forms of democracies is very suddenly we can set up our own forms of parliaments. We can start providing our ways of engaging, coming together around certain topics. We can then bring people in, and very, very quickly, the demographic of our engagement drastically changes. So I want you to leave on that note, just with the positivity and the opportunity that's available in here. And hopefully through the questions that will get asked, we'll sort of look at some of the challenges of moving into this space as well. So thank you so much for this opportunity, everyone. And yeah, I really appreciate your ears.
Adam, thank you so much. That's so fascinating. I had no idea some of these things could even be done, to be perfectly honest. I now have 1,000 questions. I'm sure everybody does as well. Should we maybe, I'm just going to look at questions from the audience first. Let me just have, let me say, what are the, Kathy, did you want to maybe ask your question?
Yes, that was amazing. I mean, really amazing, really fascinating. But I'm just wondering, what do you see as the main challenges of delivering deliberative democracy digitally? Do you see it as ending up being like a mix, and is the ideal more of a mix and match, a mix of digital and physical, or do you think really you can achieve it in the digital sphere?
So I think it's an ecosystem of all those things. You know, like before we got talking, I said that some of my best friends I've never met, and some of my best colleagues I've never met. So there's ways that I've worked and people work today that they never come together and they achieve things. in regards to the citizen assembly side of things, or that type of engagement in that process, there is an element that can't be replaced, which happens in the physical space in a virtual way. And the other thing as well is I don't always think it's a fair comparison to try and take what might be a physical delivery and try and then move it exactly into a virtual space, because there's various different things and challenges in there. And the way that you would design a virtual program or a hybrid program or a blended program would be very different to one that's exclusively virtual. But saying that, I do think there is great value in the space that we have here. And I think this period of time that we're in just now is showing that there's a depth of connection that can be fostered in this space. And because of that, it enables the width of the horizons of our conversations that we can hold in this suddenly become a lot wider than, for example, if we were rooted in a spot. So yeah, that's how I would touch on that side of the question.
We got some.
Thank you. So one of the questions we had are, would you say that in a way accessibility to a citizens assembly would be decreased by a way? Because what if, for example, you're an elderly person and you don't know how to use a computer, or if you're living somewhere and you don't have access to the internet, would you then just be excluded from any democratic processes? Or in the case of Extinction Rebellion, you know, when we have total societal collapse because of climate and ecological breakdown, what do we do then?
Yeah. So accessibility is a question that still should be constantly asked when you move into this space, because you're still hosting an application of time. But the accessibility challenges that we've been used to in our physical spaces are slightly different to our virtual ones. And they tend to be, for example, if you're looking globally, it's economic accessibility, because the internet is still not available to everyone, for example. And then you touched on there about the age side of things. So there is a process that needs to be put in place around the accessibility in this form of gathering. However, just like we've overcome many of those challenges within our physical space, I've seen so many incredible ways of gathering in this space that people get around things, whether it's this form of convening, the language barrier where people would have translators with them in there, that can be digitally done as well. I've seen things which have been really, and what we're trying to build into Tula is the way for people to have digital guides in this space to make that possible as well, so that you can connect them up there. But in regards to sort of saying one is more accessible or another wouldn't do it justice. The accessibility needs are almost the same, but they change. There's different things that make it better for and make it harder for. One thing that's really interesting around this, though, which I think is unified across human beings, is the time accessibility of this way of convening, which changes matters. So we've experienced a lot, if you're doing physical delivery, that you're hybridizing it, is that people will actually choose, if there's an option to attend virtually, they'll often choose that because it might fit into their schedule better, other than driving X amount or traveling X amount of time to be there for there. So there's a time attendance proposition that changes with this. So that's one thing that I've noticed has really changed by offering this form of convening.
Thank you. And then we've got a question on our XR Global Facebook, I think, or Twitter. I'm getting confused between all the platforms. I would do a terrible job at this digital platforms thing. How do we prevent replicating the current system's downsides to the digital version? And can we think about more agile ways of decision making and voting?
Could you help that question land again? Could you ask it to me again, please? I just want to make sure I'm in the right space when I try and find a reply.
The first one. So I'll just ask you the first question first. So it's how do we prevent replicating the current system's downsides to the digital version?
If I knew that, yeah, I think I would be in an interesting position. So I think that comes in regards to, even when we talk about the sophistication of blockchain technologies or different types of, AI formed representation, which some people are working on just now, where you can program your representation within AI to make a collection of decisions on you, and all these. The ultimate thing is it's still human being operators that are existed. So to some extent, there will be a transition where, if this is the new world that we're moving into, that it will be built from the remains of the old way of being. And there'll also be a process where we need to learn how to do this, this form of engagement, because it's a process as opposed to just an event. And there's a cultural shift of how to engage in this form of discussion that we need to take time to make sure we do right. So in regards to that, I would love for there to be a simplistic answer, but I feel I would be sort of narrowing reality to a thing that's easily to articulate. But I think that question is one I'll write down and spend a lot of time thinking about. I've kind of sloped away from giving a good answer there.
No, I think that's really valid. I think at the end of the day, there's digital has, there's algorithms and whatnot, but at the end of the day, we're still humans. So we've still got to make sure that we keep vigilant and pay attention to what's happening around us. I think Nessie, you had a follow-up question.
Thank you, Marina. Adam, I'd like to ask you, following on from that, how would you ensure that there's transparency and a safe space? When we think of physical citizens' assemblies, there's a sort of safe space, a forum where people can gather, learn and deliberate, where there's no outside influence or lobbying as such, or perhaps no sense of insecurities that you're being threatened with being open with your view. Whereas behind a screen within our homes, within our four walls, we really don't know people's circumstances. So there's that question of transparency and legitimacy and safety. Thought.
Yeah, to some extent, I do think that there's technical improvements or design improvements we can make in this space. So there's a lot more we can do around optimizing this space for dialogue type discussions, where you can see who's contributing more often, and we can do things in that. But equally, I feel that is very much to do with the role of the host of these spaces. So, for example, we've even been in physical spaces where we've not felt transparent, or we've not felt safe, or we've not felt like held by that. So it's not exclusively a digital problem or challenge, but the role of the host in these spaces is a really challenging one, because a lot of the social cues that you normally have as a host or a facilitator in physical spaces start to reduce. And then your little check-ins that you make on people to make sure they're okay start to become harder to do. But saying that, I have seen some incredible hosts in this space holding that for people and making sure that things like transparency and being accountable, and also making sure that there's fair contribution amongst the group has been done really well. So yeah, there's a blend there between we optimizing our spaces, our digital spaces, for more dialogue type settings, and almost like creating a digital roundhouse, for example. And then there's also, you know, there'll be a transition where the skilled hosts, and there are many of them out there that are really, really skilled. They should be considered as superheroes, I believe, at holding space in physical settings, that there's been a movement of them into digital spaces, and those attributes are transferring really well. And over time, once we become more accustomed to meeting in these spaces, just like we've been accelerated just now, and we become more accustomed to hosting in these spaces, and the spaces become better suited to us, I think there'll be a sort of loads of synergies of improvements in that we'll see.
Just may I ask then, have you ever considered having maybe places like a library or a special facility where people can go to hold these spaces? Because behind closed doors, I mean, you know, behind closed doors, we don't know the home environment and what dynamics are going on. So has that ever been a consideration?
Yeah, so some things, like I remember when in the early days when I was doing stuff with Democracy Earth Foundation, and I don't think it's exclusive to them, but they actually propose democratic centers. And so just now, like what we'll have is like usually a representative will have an office or something like that, but they were actually proposing that you would have a center for democratic convening, that citizens, just like, for example, there's a certain cultural behaviors that happen when you engage with a library. For example, you go there, you generally know that you have to be quiet. There's this different feeling about it, which is very different to other places. And it could even be libraries, for example. But yeah, as a place where we know that that's where this part of us goes to. Because if you think just now, it's, you know, sometimes it's in pubs, it's in it's at football matches, or it's at, you know, at different places where scout halls, for example. But yeah, it would be, I think, a vast improvement to keep that space. But then equally, the other side of that is what you've got to realize is many people's homes are very accessible for them. You know, they've customized that experience to meet all their needs. And actually to engage in this place is sometimes their preferred option. So yeah, there is a blend of all that to take into consideration.
Thank you.
A slightly more technical question there. The first thing I wanted to ask, which hopefully you can explain in very simple terms for people who don't know anything about it, but what is blockchain, first of all?
I was so hoping that wouldn't come up.
And then to build on that, to hold a citizens' assembly online, it needs to be a secure encrypted platform. How secure are video platforms in your opinion? And have you optimized security and encryption for Tula, asks Katya. But I'm the one asking about blockchain because I don't know what that is.
So blockchain is, I find it, even having worked in it and worked with it and designed on it, I find it still a challenging thing to articulate so well. But essentially it's the form of technology which, if you've heard of things like cryptocurrencies and digital forms of money, are hosted on. It's a form of technology that was gifted to the world in a way, and it makes it very difficult for someone to replicate something in there. So, you know, for example, if you were to copy and paste a document on your computer, you would make two and they would kind of be independent of each other. But with blockchain, everything is all connected. So if you move something from someplace, the other part knows about it. So for hosting things that can't be replicated because they devalue, so units of currency, for example, or voting tokens. Say if I was to allocate myself 100 voting tokens on blockchain, and I was then to go away and say, well, I want to give myself 200. The blockchain makes it very difficult for that process to happen in that spaces. So that's the technology that governs it. But yeah, as you can tell through my language just now, even having spent time in it, I've reached the sort of the capacities of it, of articulating it well. Was it Katja that asked the other question?
Yes.
And she was talking about end-to-end encryption of video-based communication. Is that correct?
Yeah, how secure is a video platform if you were to be on there and it's all, you know, confidential like a Citizens Assembly?
Yeah, so this is really prevalent just now because even the platform that we are in just now, so Zoom has been is going through some challenging periods in regards to its ethics as well as its security breaches that have happened in there. And they've happened for two reasons. One, because there's been a cultural naivety of people moving into the space that don't quite know how to keep it secure, but also there's been a bit of vague use of language when they've used things saying they've implied it's end-to-end encrypted, and once you start getting under the technical layers of that, you realize that it's not been. So that's what they're getting called up on just now. And then the reason, and to answer that, it's quite a challenging thing to do to fully encrypt these type of gatherings. The platform that we're integrated with, or we're integrating with, called Jitsi, they're doing incredible work in that space just now at trying to make that side of things. But what I always kind of revert back to is that this is similar to a physical gathering space. So even if you're sitting in a room, for example, a conference room where you've decided to have your citizen assembly, you know, someone walking past the hall might hear you talk, for example. So this is where I mentioned about that discrepancy sort of thing, is that we need to understand that these places are as safe as can be and are becoming better at that space. And then we need to start questioning about like what it is that we're bringing to them. But as I said, in regards to the work that we've been doing with Tula and the team, the open community, the open source community at Jitsi, they're doing incredible work just now at making these fully encrypted so that the guests of the room get a key to it, because there's balances of making it safe and encrypted that you have to trade off about allowing people to basically get into them. So from a design perspective, it's a challenge and a technical, but what they are trialing just now, which is really nice, and I would recommend checking it out, is a way to do that, which involves giving people a unique key. And if you do not have that key, that it's all scrambled. So you can turn up in the room, but you'll just never hear anything or see anything. So yeah, that we're getting a much better in that space.
Thank you. So yeah, that's such a good point, that we assume that if you're in a room that, then that it's secure, but then yeah, you never know what. So yeah, it's interesting to kind of match real life to digital life, and how actually things we're worried about digitally we're not worried about in real life, and that sort of thing. So interestingly enough, so we'd arranged for this talk to happen before the announcement came from Climate Assembly UK that they were going to carry on with their assembly digitally. So that happened today. For those of you who don't know, Climate Assembly UK is this citizens' assembly set up by 6 parliamentary committees, and is deliberating how to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So although from an Extinction Rebellion point of view, this target is very inadequate and needs to be looked at, and there are many issues with it, it is very interesting that this is happening, because of course it is a citizens' assembly, even though it's not the citizens' assembly as per our third demand. It is happening, and then today they moved online, and I believe, Kathy, you have a few questions about that.
Well, one in particular, really, the fact this weekend was supposed to have been the final weekend of the Climate Assembly UK, and originally they postponed it and they were going to wait until such a time they could have a face-to-face, which is the same postponement has gone on for the final weekend for the French Citizens Assembly. So, am I being too complicated? Too many words here. What I wanted to say is that originally it was going to be one weekend. They've gone online today, and they're going to have a further 2. So I'm just sort of wondering what might be the thinking behind having an extra 2 weekends online. Any ideas?
Yeah. So one of them is probably because, remember, when they designed their form of engagement, they had no consideration about what the events were going to come up. So they would have never even factored in the digital transformation required to gather in that space. So there is, when you move into spaces like this with any group, similar to if you're hosting, for example, an event or in some conference center for 2 weekends, and then you move to another one for another 2 weekends. So both in physical places, there's an adjustment that people will go to. They have to think about how to get there. They have to know where to park. They have to do this and this and this. So those type of challenges exist when you do a digital transformation like this. The other thing that's probably meaning that it will be spread over longer amount of time is, and I'm assuming here because I still don't know the details, but most likely what it is that the amount of time they might be gathering for at any given moment will be shorter. So when you gather in spaces like this, it's an intense form of gathering as such, which you have a level of sort of screen fatigue that you need to consider. So where you might gather in a room for 5 hours, for example, to move that into this type of space would be challenging. So they might be factoring things into that. So I say it would be a combination of their delivering given the tools that's available to them just now, which is a challenge to convene things like this. This is why we've been working towards trying to improve it, and also trying to take into consider the sort of adoption fatigue that will be in that space as well, from them having no prior consideration to meet like this. But I do think it's very courageous of them to do this and not just say, no, we're not going to do that at all. And the other thing which I think is very valuable in this space is that group will have formed an entity of itself because it's been convened so long, and they'll pull that into this space. And you can do that both ways as well. So in the past, we've convened in this space before meeting up physically. And you see that the group are leaps and bounds connected before you get into the physical space and stuff like that. So yeah, that will be interesting to see what comes out of that. But that aside, what I do think is quite interesting is that there has been legislation that's been passed recently which allows community councils that allows council planning meetings to convene virtually. And I also know that courts as well and are trying to figure out ways of doing this. And it's really interesting because a lot of our legislation that we have in place has been, or attendance has been a privilege of the physical, for example, and now we're seeing that changing. So that will make these forms of engagement much easier as times go forward.
Nessie, I think you had another question from the audience.
Yes, Adam, it's kind of a hybrid question. What evidence do you have that the learning phase of a citizens' assembly would be equally engaging online as face-to-face? And also Amy has asked that, does physical distance stop empathy? You talked about, can we move the spiritual to a technical space? So have you looked into any research around this?
Yeah, so the first one, I think both things are too new for us to have a real depth of understanding in there. It's not to say that there aren't some, but pieces of research exclusively to virtual citizen assemblies, for example, have not come across on that depth. There are research pieces out there in regards to virtual forms of gathering and learning in that space. But was it Amy that asked the second question?
Yes.
Around the levels of empathy. So this has always been a huge question for me, and many of the people that know the work I do, given like the time that I've worked in peace education and in physical spaces, have often been quite surprised that I so openly speak about what's possible in spaces like this. And like from my own perspective, I feel I've connected deeply in these spaces and do regularly. But there's also been really interesting studies done in this space as well in regards to, let me try and recall the details. It was a study done on children, young children, I believe, where they showed the children a video of their parents on a video call, and asked them to engage with it. And then they also showed the child the same video, but it was live. So there was a recorded version and a live one. And what they showed was the type of emotional responses were very different to the one that was live. They could understand that there was a physical connection in that space. And that would go to some sort of degree of saying that you could foster that level of that deep empathy that you require to navigate different and complex views in this space. But again, this is not exclusively a technical thing. So for example, if and people have set us this, and we've set the challenge as well, is how do you build for like empathy in these spaces? And you can do so much in this space, but actually it's about what you bring as an individual to this space. And it also relies on the host that's holding that space to make those individuals feel safe enough to contribute in those styles. But from my experience, I definitely have connected deeply with individuals in here. My most recent experience, and next week will be the same, as being involved in like work that reconnects by a lady called Joanna Macy. Some of the connections we've formed in groups of people I've never met have been so incredible. So yeah, I hope that covers a wide enough area of that question. It was Amy. Thank you so much, Amy, for that.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, we love Joanna Macy. She's wonderful lady. Okay, so last question, because we need to stop live streaming. This is from Simon McLady from XR Scotland, on Facebook Scotland. If this was rolled out in the future, how would you reach out to include people not online?
Yeah, so this is a challenge as well, which I think is brought up a lot with citizen assemblies is how do you go through the process of making people making people get here, for example, that are and there's various different processes people have put in regards to doing a selection process to make people get there. And we've come across this challenge recently as well. So just in my local community, we helped set up a platform called Kinross Kindness, which were connecting people who were self-isolating with people that could help, but we used a digital platform to do this. And much of the participants that were needing it didn't have readily or weren't showing up in spaces too often in our digital world. So there is a level that we need to do in this space where we have to ensure that we're taking that into account. And you know, we've got various different means of doing this. The thing that seemed to be most successful in that story that I shared with you there was those posters that go up on the wall that you pull the tags off, for example, that take you to the place. But then I've also seen really good things done where, you know, you have, for individuals that don't have access to this space, once you do identify them, it's that they set up a place that they can go to so that they can engage in this through this form of technology. But the optimist in me always leans on the fact that I really feel as a species we should be moving into a direction where this form of engagement and communication is a human right, and that as citizens we get access to internet globally with you know, without the barriers that are in place just now. And I would like to see more move in that direction. But then what we've also got to realize as well is that think about the generations that are coming through just now, who are also very fluent in these spaces as well. So there is there's considerations to be taken into there. But one thing that's always that I've always been aware of is, despite the failings of the democratic processes that we have just now, despite how they're bad, for most people can get access to them. So we do need to take that into consideration when we're doing things. But I know other people have solved this and engaged people and got them into these spaces safely.
Thank you so much, Adam. I think Nessie, we're going to get kicked off the live stream soon.
Yes. Thank you, Marine. Adam, do you have any final word before you go?
One of deep gratitude. For this is a very privileged place to be in, to be able to speak freely about these thoughts and ideas. And it's also, you know, it's rare to be in this space where it's held so well. You know, I've spoke about these things and been shot down many times before. So I think we're very receptive about it just now. And what I would say is, although, and I've got a deep connection to the causes of what you guys are, Extinction Rebellion, are up to, and that the citizens' assemblies are being, you know, are really being prioritized around climate justice and in that space. I feel that the process is going to come into its own use over the next few years as citizens, when we have to convene around this challenging transition that we're going through just now. And we need methodologies and processes that we can lean on to help guide us through them. And I think that in a way could be a place where we discuss everything from how we decide to, you know, live on Earth going forward, how we distribute our resources, and not just exclusively just for the climate thing. So I see opportunity for citizens' assemblies and digital democracies that, you know, that can be used in many different applications.
Thank you so much, Adam. Kathy, a final word?
That was amazing. I'm really, it was wonderful. It was great. I felt a lot of empathy. And I would like to say that I think online I think it's really nice if you have a mix and match. If you've met people and then you meet them in spaces like this, and the same warmth somehow filters through. Thank you really very much. It was brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks,
My
Kathy.
pleasure.
Marine.
Thank you.
No, I was just thinking that loads of us in the Citizens Assembly working group, until this time last year when we all met on Parliament Square, loads of us had actually never met physically before. And then when we all met each other in person in the April Rebellion, it was wonderful, but it felt like we did know each other really well. So it's a really interesting point, actually. And yeah, I'm going to mull this over later. So yes, thank you so much, Adam.
Thanks, Marine. Thank you to everyone and to Christian as well for amazing technical work. And just to advertise that tomorrow there's Cooking for Climate on Facebook Live at 7 p.m. and then next week live streams of Money Rebellion Monday to Friday at 4 p.m. That's British summertime, Marine, London time, UTC +1. And yes, we are extremely privileged that we have this space and that we can speak with liberty. There are many parts of the world that are not at that in that place. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.